Have you ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect you? I was standing in the middle of Main Street on a Tuesday afternoon in 1946 when he slapped me. Not a gentle correction. A full, open-handed strike that echoed off the brick storefronts and silenced the entire block. Women stopped mid-step. Men lowered their newspapers. And I stood there, my cheek burning, my daughter's hand trembling in mine, while everyone pretended they hadn't seen it. He was a hero, after all. Captain James Crawford. 3 years in the Pacific. Purple Heart. Bronze Star. The town had thrown him a parade just 6 weeks earlier. I had stood on that same street corner waving a small flag, my heart so full, I thought it might burst. Watching him ride past in the back of a convertible, waving to the crowd like he owned the sky itself. And maybe he thought he did. The slap came because I had questioned him. In public, in front of Mr. Henderson from the hardware store. I had asked, quietly, respectfully, if we could wait until Friday to buy the new radio, because the mortgage was due and we were already 3 weeks behind. That was all. A simple question. A practical concern. The kind of conversation married people have every single day. But he didn't hear a question. He heard defiance. Before I tell you why that moment changed everything, let me take you back. I was 19 when James left for the war. We had been married exactly 11 months. Our daughter, Eleanor, was just 4 months old. Still learning to smile, still waking 3 times a night with her tiny fists reaching for warmth. The day he shipped out, he held her for exactly 7 minutes. I counted. I stood in the doorway of our little house on Maple Street and watched him memorize her face, his thumb, tracing the soft curve of her cheek, his eyes wet but his jaw locked tight the way men's jaws locked in those days when they were trying not to break. "You take care of her," he said. "Not us, her—" And then he was gone. 3 years. 1,095 days. I know because I marked each one on the calendar hanging in the kitchen. A small pencil dot in the corner of each square, like a prisoner counting time. Which, in a way, I was. Not of the house or the town, but of waiting. Of suspending my entire life in this strange, breathless space between wife and widow, between hope and grief, between the woman I was and the woman I was becoming without even realizing it. I worked at the textile mill during the war. 6 days a week, 10-hour shifts, my hands moving so fast over the looms that I stopped thinking about them, stopped thinking about anything except the rhythm of the machines and the weight of Eleanor sleeping on my mother's lap 3 blocks away. I sent James letters every Sunday night. Long letters. Letters about Eleanor's first steps, her first words. The way she had started calling the mailman Papa because he was the only man she saw regularly. Letters about the victory garden I planted in the backyard, about the ration stamps, about the women at the mill who cried in the bathroom during lunch breaks because their husbands weren't coming home. He wrote back, not often, maybe once every 6 weeks. Short letters, practical letters. We moved north. Weather is hot. Tell Eleanor I love her. Never anything about what he was seeing. What he was doing, what was happening to him in those jungles half a world away where boys became ghosts and ghosts became men who forgot how to sleep. I should have known then. I should have heard the silence between his words. When the telegram came saying he was coming home, I cried for 2 straight hours. Eleanor, now 3 years old, patted my face with her small hands and asked why Mama was leaking. That's what she called it, leaking. As if emotions were just water that spilled over when you got too full. I cleaned the house until my knuckles bled. I sewed a new dress, blue cotton with white buttons, because blue was his favorite color. I taught Eleanor to say "Welcome home, Daddy" 73 times until she could say it without giggling. I baked his mother's apple pie recipe, even though I had never successfully made a pie in my entire life, and this one came out lopsided with a burnt edge. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted him to come home and see that I had survived. That we had survived. That the life he left was still here, still waiting, still whole. But that was only the beginning. He stepped off the train on a cold morning in November 1945, and I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost maybe 20 pounds. His uniform hung loose on his shoulders. His eyes had this flat, distant quality, like he was looking at you through a window instead of actually seeing you. When I ran to him, when I threw my arms around his neck the way I had imagined doing 1,000 times, he went rigid. Completely still, like I was restraining him instead of embracing him. Eleanor hid behind my skirt and refused to say her practice line. The first week, I made excuses. He's tired, he needs time. He's adjusting. The second week, I started walking on eggshells, measuring my words, keeping Eleanor quiet during the day so he could sleep. The third week, he stopped sleeping altogether. I would wake at 2 in the morning to find him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, smoking cigarette after cigarette, staring at nothing. "James?" I would whisper. "Come back to bed." He wouldn't answer, or he would answer with something that made no sense. "Did you hear that?" he'd ask. "The mortar? Did you hear them?" There were no mortar. There was only the sound of our neighbor's dog barking 2 houses down and the wind rattling the window screens. By Christmas, he had found work at the manufacturing plant. Good work, steady pay. The kind of job that should have made everything easier. But money didn't fix what was broken. Money didn't stop him from flinching every time a car backfired. Money didn't stop him from shouting at Eleanor when she dropped her fork at dinner. Money didn't stop him from looking at me like I was a stranger he resented having to live with. I tried everything. I tried giving him space. I tried filling the space. I tried talking. I tried silence. I tried being the woman he left behind, young, optimistic, easy to please. I tried being the woman I had become, stronger, capable, independent. Nothing worked. Because the man who came home was not the man who left. The James who left had been gentle, funny, a little serious, maybe, a little too focused on doing everything right, but kind. He used to bring me wildflowers he picked on his way home from work. He used to dance with me in the kitchen while the radio played something slow and sweet. He used to hold Eleanor above his head and make airplane noises until she shrieked with laughter. The James who came home didn't pick flowers, didn't dance, didn't laugh. And that was the moment I stopped being who they thought I was. The first time he raised his voice to me in public was at church. I had suggested, gently, in the church parking lot after service, that maybe we should talk to Pastor Williams about the nightmares, about the way he couldn't seem to settle back into regular life. He turned on me so fast that I took a step backward out of pure instinct. "You think I'm crazy?" he said, loud enough that 3 families turned to look. "You think I need some preacher telling me how to be a man?" I didn't think that. I just thought he needed help. But I learned quickly that help was not something Captain James Crawford was willing to accept. Heroes don't need help. Heroes don't break. Heroes come home and slide seamlessly back into their lives, like the war was just a long business trip instead of 3 years of hell that carved away everything soft and left only rage and fear and this terrible suffocating pride. The slap on Main Street came 4 months after that. 4 months of slow erosion. 4 months of me shrinking smaller and smaller, trying to take up less space, trying not to trigger whatever landmine was buried in his mind. 4 months of Eleanor learning to whisper, learning to disappear into her room when Daddy came home, learning that love was supposed to feel like fear. Have you ever felt something like this? That moment when you realize the person you promised your life to has become someone you don't recognize, someone you're afraid of? I picked Eleanor up after he slapped me. She was crying. I wasn't. Not yet. I took her hand and I walked home, my face burning, my heart pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat, while behind me the street slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed. The hardware store door chimed as someone went inside. Mrs. Patterson from the post office said something about the weather. No one followed me. No one asked if I was all right. No one suggested that maybe, just maybe, a man who hits his wife in the middle of Main Street is not actually a hero. That night, James didn't apologize. He sat at the dinner table like nothing had happened, ate the pot roast I had made, complimented the potatoes, asked Eleanor how school was going. She was 5 years old and terrified of him. She mumbled something about spelling words and then asked to be excused, even though she had barely touched her food. After she went to bed, he finally looked at me, really looked at me. "You embarrassed me," he said. "In front of Henderson, in front of the whole town. You made me look weak." I didn't answer. I was too tired to argue. Too tired to explain that asking about money wasn't an attack on his manhood. Too tired to defend myself for having the audacity to speak. "You need to understand something," he continued, his voice low and measured. "I fought for this country. I bled for this country. I saw men die right in front of me. And I came home to a wife who questions me in public like I'm some kind of child who needs permission. I didn't know it yet. But the world was about to change. Not his world. Mine. It started small, a decision. A single, quiet decision that I made while washing dishes that night, my hands submerged in soapy water, my reflection distorted in the window above the sink. I decided that I would not disappear. I would not become invisible. I would not teach my daughter that this is what love looks like. A woman shrinking. A woman silent. A woman apologizing for existing. I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. This was 1946. Women didn't just leave their husbands, especially not war heroes. But I stopped shrinking. I stopped apologizing. I stopped pretending that everything was fine. I started speaking to him in full sentences again, even when he didn't want to hear it. I started taking Eleanor to the park on Saturday afternoons, even when he said we should stay home. I started having coffee with Margaret from next door, even when he called it gossip and a waste of time. I started reclaiming small pieces of myself, small territories of dignity, like planting flags on the moon of my own life. He hated it. I could see the frustration building in him, this anger that had nowhere to go, because I was not actually defying him. I was just refusing to be afraid anymore. This anger that had nowhere anymore. This anger that had nowhere to go because I wasn't actually defying him. I was just refusing to be afraid anymore. And that somehow was worse. The second slap came 3 months later. This time in our kitchen. This time because I had served dinner late, because I had been helping Mrs. Patterson, whose husband had died the week before, and she had no one else to help sort through his things. He grabbed my wrist, yanked me close, and slapped me hard enough that I tasted blood. But this time I didn't cry. This time I looked him dead in the eye and said, very quietly, very calmly, "Don't ever touch me like that again." He let go like I had burned him. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that I had already survived 3 years without him. I had already raised our daughter alone, managed a household alone, worked myself to exhaustion alone, made 1,000 decisions alone. The war hadn't just changed him. It had changed me too. I was not the 19-year-old girl who waved goodbye in 1942. I was a 25-year-old woman who had learned that strength isn't loud, it isn't aggressive. It's simply the refusal to break. Stay with me until the end. It's worth it. The turning point came in the summer of 1947. Eleanor was 6. We were at a town picnic, one of those community gatherings where everyone brought casseroles and the men played horseshoes and the children ran wild through the field behind the Methodist church. James was drinking with his buddies, all veterans, all swapping stories and laughing too loud in that particular way men laugh when they read trying to prove something. I was sitting on a blanket with Margaret and a few other women, watching Eleanor play tag with the other children when I heard him start telling a story. I recognized it immediately. It was the story about how he had to discipline me for spending too much money on groceries. Except that wasn't what happened. What happened was I had bought Eleanor new shoes because her old ones had holes in them, and he had yelled at me for 20 minutes about priorities and responsibility. But in his version, I was foolish, wasteful, a woman who needed to be kept in line. The men laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that's what they did. They laughed when other men asserted dominance. They laughed when women were put in their place. They laughed because the world had taught them that this was normal, that this was right, that this was just how things were. Margaret touched my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "It's not worth it." But it was worth it. I stood up. I walked across the field. I didn't rush. I didn't storm. I simply walked with purpose until I was standing right in front of their circle, my hands folded in front of me, my voice calm and clear. "James," I said, "when you're finished telling lies about your wife, Eleanor and I will be ready to go home." The laughter stopped. Every single man went silent. You could hear the wind in the trees, the distant sound of children playing, someone's radio playing big band music from a car in the parking lot. James's face went red, then white, then red again. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I repeated, meeting his eyes without flinching. "When you're finished lying about me to make yourself feel bigger, we'll be ready to go home." I didn't wait for his response. I turned around and walked back to the blanket, picked up Eleanor's hand, and we left. We walked the 1.5 miles home in silence, Eleanor skipping beside me, humming a song she had learned at school, completely unaware that her mother had just committed an unforgivable social sin. When James came home 4 hours later, I was sitting at the kitchen table. Eleanor was in bed. I had made coffee. I had prepared myself for whatever came next. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking at me. "You humiliated me," he finally said. "Yes," I replied. "I did, in front of everyone. Yes, those men are my friends. Then they should know the truth about you." He sat down across from me, not angry, not exploding, just tired. More tired than I had ever seen him look. "I don't know how to be here anymore," he said, and his voice cracked. "I don't know how to be normal. I don't know how to come home from what I saw and just be a husband, be a father, be normal." And there it was, finally, the truth underneath all the rage and all the control and all the violence. He was broken, and he didn't know how to say it, so he was breaking everyone around him instead. "Then get help," I said softly. "Please, get help." He didn't get help, not right away. Not for another 8 months, but something shifted that night. He stopped hitting me. He stopped humiliating me in public. He started sleeping in the spare room because the nightmares were so bad that he would wake up swinging, and he didn't want to hurt me accidentally. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a kind of armistice. A ceasefire in our private war. The real healing came slowly, painfully, in small increments that took years instead of weeks. He finally went to see a doctor in the city, someone who worked with veterans. He started talking to Pastor Williams, not about religion exactly, but about guilt and fear and the weight of survival when so many others didn't survive. He started trying to remember how to be gentle with Eleanor, how to read her bedtime stories without flinching when she laughed too loud. And I learned something too. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything they do. That respect is a two-way street. That dignity isn't something someone gives you, it's something you claim for yourself. Over and over and over again, even when the world tells you to be quiet, to be small, to be grateful for whatever scraps of humanity you're allowed to keep. By 1952, we had found a kind of peace. Not perfect. Not healed, but functional. Respectful. He still had nightmares. I still remembered every slap, every humiliation, every moment when I felt invisible in my own life. But we had learned to exist together in a way that didn't destroy either of us. Eleanor grew up strong. She grew up watching her mother refuse to disappear. She grew up understanding that love without respect is just control wearing a prettier mask. She grew up knowing that her voice mattered, that her presence mattered, that she did not need to shrink to make anyone else comfortable. And James learned to live with his ghosts. Not defeat them. Not forget them. Just learn to coexist with them without letting them destroy everything he touched. On our 20th wedding anniversary in 1957, he gave me wildflowers. Just like he used to do before the war. He didn't say much. Just, "I'm sorry," and "thank you for not giving up." And I didn't need him to say more than that. Because I could see in his eyes that he finally understood what it had cost me to stay, to fight, to refuse to let him erase me. Respect does not erase the past. It simply teaches us how to breathe again. I'm 78 years old now. James passed away in 1993. Eleanor is a grandmother herself. And sometimes when I'm alone in this quiet house, I think about that day on Main Street. I think about the slap that echoed off the buildings. I think about the woman I was then, scared, humiliated, uncertain. And I think about the woman I became. Not because of the war, not because of his trauma, but because I chose not to disappear. I chose dignity when dignity was not fashionable. I chose my voice when women were supposed to be silent. I chose to show my daughter that survival is not the same as living, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to become invisible. Share this with someone who would understand. The war didn't end when the soldiers came home. It continued in living rooms and kitchens, in whispered conversations and silent prayers, in the hearts of women who held their families together while their husbands learned to be human again. We were not on the front lines, but we fought our own battles, quiet battles, invisible battles. The kind of battles that don't get parades or medals or monuments, but they matter. God, they matter. If stories like this remind you what dignity feels like, subscribe. You belong here. And don't miss the next story. It is something truly unforgettable.